Hey there, welcome to episode 136 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, as usual, Dan Hugo. I'm recording this at 11:58 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in Greater Vegas on Wednesday, June 17, 2026. We normally publish new episodes on Wednesdays, occasionally in the morning. We might make it if we can do this in 2 minutes. Otherwise, it will be midday. I have to say they've been more rare or less frequent. Take your pick. But I have a little bit of a sinus headache that I'm trying to get over. They come along when the weather is changing here in Vegas and leads to, there you go, sinus headaches for me. So we'll make it with today's title and topic, History Rhymes. I was going to say that history repeats itself, but that would go against at least one of the quotes, the Mark Twain quote, which we will get to. History rhymes. This is not a story per se. It's a follow-on to a previous story, a story I told in a previous episode about the history of European unification class, but it also ties into the general theme, history, looking back, reflecting, analyzing, comparing, contrasting. So I figured, I'm almost finished with the second of the two books that I'm going to refer to here, but there's two more that I'm going to read after, which is fine because there will be two more books after that and so on. I'm always reading something. That's how that works. If you're not familiar with quaggling sand, it is the technical term for pins and needles. I came up with it when I was about 4 years old. That's all you need to know about that for now. These are stories, reflections, and whatnot. You will probably never hear or see even a ghost. I don't know if that's a Freudian slip, a guest on this program. I have other programs for guests and so on, especially the FFS Talk Audio program, which is explicitly aimed at having guests. And I should try to find a guest now and then, one of these days. Anyway, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary, which I will read to you. I think it's one long sentence, as it should be. There are a few links. There are book references and terminology and, historical elements. Yeah. 4 books and 2 Wikipedia pages. Well, the books are also Wikipedia pages, except for one. I have water here to go along with my various maladies. So let's get to it. A summary of today's episode. History is one of those topic areas where you do not need to be an expert. You don't even need to take classes, really. All anyone really needs is a library card. And that might not even be true anymore, though you should still have a library card. What is a Thucydides Trap? I think I'm saying that correctly. I've said it correctly before, I know that. Thucydides Trap, and are we in the fourth turning? 2 books. Two books in separate bindings. The links for today's episode, the first 2, the usuals, quagglingsand.com. Quaggling is correctly spelled QUOGGLINGSAND, Quaggling Sand, just like it sounds, .com. One of these days, there will be the authoritative publishing point of publication for our various audio programs and other such things. It's one of those things there's too many other things going on. I talk about that during the update sometimes, the Monday Buy Me an Update audio program, Monday mornings. And in the Coffee Solo program, I kind of meander through some of the stuff that's going on lately with projects and not getting cooperation. So quagglingsand.com, one of these days. Hopefully we'll get some web traffic at that point. The profile page linking everything. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. It is what the Buy Me an Update audio program is named for. That's where you find it first published. That used to be where it was only published, but that's not where you publish podcasts, of course. So 2 hours after publishing at the point of origin, the Buy Me an Update is published at Buy Me a Coffee, hence the name. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo/posts. And then 2 hours later, it's published everywhere else. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, the RSS feed. It goes to YouTube. Eventually, I've been seeing that YouTube is they're tremendously backed up on the RSS fed podcast auto posting. So it used to be minutes. Now it's like half a day. So who knows? So yeah, those are the usual 2 every week, same links. Now, Thucydides, Wikipedia page. Thucydides was an Athenian general and historian, and he did many people say he kind of changed the game on history, on capturing history analysis, or analyzing history. Take your pick. I was going with both at the same time. So Thucydides, Athenian, was talking about the Peloponnesian War, Athens, Sparta. If you've seen the 300, don't even think about that. But so he did some good stuff there, and the Thucydides Trap is the likes of Sparta trying to take on the larger Athens, and then so there's a lot to be learned there, and you can read more about that specifically at the Thucydides Trap. I was going to try to save it, and that just made it worse. The Thucydides Trap is a Wikipedia page about that specifically, so the 2 of them together will give you a pretty good idea. These feed into a book by Graham Allison. I think he's a professor. I was going to say Dr. Graham Allison, but he only goes by Graham Allison as an author, so that's fine. So the title, which I've ellipsed it, the full title, which is on Goodreads. There's no Wikipedia page for this book, which is probably fine. Goodreads I know it's owned by Amazon, but it seems a little bit less heavy-handed for marketing. Like, it doesn't really try to sell you the book right up front. As far as I know, I'm just checking again. Yeah, so it's reasonable. It gives you the basics about the book. The full title, Destined for War, Can America and China Escape the Thucydides Trap? Or, no, the Escape Thucydides Trap. I'll tell you, it's a fun fact. The spelling of Thucydides is Thucydides. So, Thucydides, Sidides is pretty easy. Thucydides. So how do I remember that? My roommate in college was Tuck. Thuc. Tuck, if you're pronouncing it correctly. So right away I was like, oh, okay. Thucydides. Okay, so the Thucydides Trap. Actually, kind of an interesting idea. Very timely, as I will describe why I selected that book to read recently. So that's a Goodreads link, and then the Strauss-Howe Generational Theory Wikipedia page. It is the basis for the other book that I'm just about to finish, The Fourth Turning is Here, by Neil Howe. Unfortunately, his co-author and co-theorist, William Strauss, passed away. I think it was in 2021. It was shortly after they published the second book. So The Fourth Turning is Here is actually the third book on this specific topic, and his co-author would have been also a co-author of that book, but for his untimely passing. The Fourth Turning is Here. Okay, so the Strauss-Howe Generational Theory, you can check that out for the general theory, generational theory, but it's the general theory of the generational theory. So here's what we're talking about. The Fourth Turning is Here is an update to a previous book called The Fourth Turning, An American Prophecy by Neil Howe and William Strauss. It was sort of a practical presentation that they later published in yet another book called Generations, which was published in 2021, which I'll mention again later. So I'm going to get that book too. But so I decided to start with the sequel because, hey, if The Fourth Turning is Here, that's what I want to know first. And then I'll probably grab Generations and then The Fourth Turning, see what the differences are. Yeah, so Wikipedia pages for Strauss-Howe Generational Theory, The Fourth Turning is Here by Neil Howe, The Fourth Turning, An American Prophecy by Neil Howe and William Strauss. And then not listed, because I don't really have any idea yet what's going on with that one, is Generations, also by Neil Howe and William Strauss. You'll find links to it in here somewhere, so if you're interested, you'll be able to locate it. So 2 books today. Why? Well, first, a reference to my EU history and the colonies. If you happen to listen to that episode, and I think it was 133, if I remember correctly, I was talking about my time in a class in 1993, my senior year of college, called The History of European Unification, and the presentation that I made that argued that the formation of the EU, which it was that same year, was when it started. To say it started then is to perhaps discount all the effort that started. I think it was in the 50s to actually arrive at this point. It was sometime. I can't remember if it was like 51, 53, somewhere in there, or maybe in 58. That's history for you. So while reading The Fourth Turning is now, so the book I'm nearly finished with, there's a section where the author discusses the alignment of the various moving parts that are described throughout the book of the generational theory and then actual historical events and different phase of life, age groups, and it's a lot of stuff. He describes the state of affairs around the Revolutionary War. So again, if you happen to listen to that episode, I describe my project, which was a slide. It was literally a slide deck. It was an engineering view of the formation of the European Union. And I made the arguments I made were basically about aligning efforts and stability given the nature of the starting conditions and all this. So I thought the slides were pretty cool. And the people in the class liked it. The professor was like, okay. And I think I got a B- or something. So, I mean, I put a lot of work into it. So I think he appreciated that. And I contend that I was not too far off this many years later. It's been 33 years. Did I do the math right? 93 to 2003 is 10 and then 20. So 30, then 33. I think that's right. Common Core math in action. I've never taken a class in Common Core, so I don't know if that was true, but anyway. So I made that presentation. The History of European Unification was the class. I pointed out by way of comparison that the colonies in the so-called New World were uniting against a common adversary and were generally aligned where the various countries of what was to be the EU in its earliest days, so in 1983 and thereabouts, were basing their efforts more on economic considerations, though there was a common adversary back in the 30s and 40s, but that's not when the EU was forming. It's when they started talking about it shortly after, again, I think it was in the 50s, but they actually formed the EU in a state of, post-Cold War, what's in the 90s? There was Silicon Valley was just about to start, so arguably there was some unforeseen economic opportunity on the horizon. The explosion of technology and the generation of wealth as a result, and so on. So it's probably a good time to form an economic union, an European economic community was one of the early names. So good, but yeah, they didn't form under with a common adversary other than we don't have enough money. And if you want to look at how that could shake out for different countries, you can look at Greece versus Germany. Just the values of their currencies when they were synchronizing everything. And then when Greece had huge problems, that's when we all learned what austerity meant. Two things came to mind at this point when I was reading this current book. First, that I did not mention the loyalists, which he did, Neil Howe. The loyalists who were living in the colonies, they were part of the the colonies in the New World, colonial New World. But were on the side of the British, and they preferred to not have a revolutionary war. They were loyalists. That's how that works. Though it's a fair assumption in general. I mean, there's always going to be people who want to go with the other side or stick with the status quo or however you want to look at it. I would simply view this as part of the colonial population. I would view that part of the colonial population as British, and most of the colonists were British. I mean, there were colonists from other places too, but if you're loyal to the British, then we'll just call you British. So the colonists that wanted to have, to conduct a revolutionary war and to declare independence and eventually form their own country, that was a different group. The other part of the detailing of colonial times in the Fourth Turning is Now book was that there were actually quite deadly quarrels proceeding during the larger war, such that there was not so much a simple us versus them alignment as I was referring to in my project in 1983, and then when I was describing it. So there was more opportunistic score settling, perhaps. It's been a long time since I had a a deep dive into colonial history, but that is where we came from, and it has been 250 years, and it might be worth flipping through a couple of books. Still, the colonies did join forces to move toward independence. From a higher level view, I will claim my observations were still valid. I'm not going to say I was like spot on, absolutely correct, because this was back in '93, and I was describing that argument now, so I wasn't necessarily relitigating it. But I do want to be clear that I did notice that I probably could have been a little bit more detailed. Ultimately, the colonies did, if memory serves, become an independent country that eventually constructed its own constitution after our first try with the Articles of Confederation. But we don't really need to. Oh, we know we do need to talk about those sorts of things. But the Constitution, 1787, Madison, all kinds of stuff. Republic, only if we can keep it. So we'll find out. Apparently they had an expiration date on it. So we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, it was not all for one and one for all across the board. If we examine intra-colony relations more closely, and that's probably worth doing since we are where we are today, and apparently in the fourth turning. So the Thucydides Trap, and that is a difficult word to say until you say it a few times, and it's not so bad, but Thucydides Trap. I think somewhere in that first book, the Allison book, Graham Allison, I believe he says, or he writes Thucydidean, or something like that. I was like, what is going on with these extra words, extra letters to make extra variations? Anyway, Thucydides Trap. You'll sometimes see it with an apostrophe or whatever. You know what we're talking about. Our U.S. president, the current one as we're recording this, visited China in May of 2026 for a summit of sorts. I mean, this is forever ago. It's probably about a month ago. He was in China for like 4 days or something. I think he was intending to go there and to celebrate the most brilliant, the most beautiful word, the entire notion of tariffs. I'm still not sure that he knows that, we pay tariffs. Anyway, so he went there to probably talk from a position of strength, more so than he actually had to speak from. I think the general consensus was President Xi Jinping came across as so if there was a winner, he came across as a little bit stronger. So he was reasonably welcome, though. I mean, didn't come down to fisticuffs. He was welcomed by the Chinese President Xi Jinping and other dignitaries, a lot of Chinese children, and some press, although some press did not get to go, I think it was. It was the whole nine. Very nice. A decent state visit. Popular opinion suggests there was no big win for the U.S. afterwards. No surprise, although, retrospectively, there was something about crop purchases, so agriculture, some other stuff, but, those remain to be seen. It's hard to say. It's hard to say if those were deals or MOUs or handshakes. Who knows? The Chinese call President Trump the nation builder, I think it is. I think it's nation builder or world builder. I think it was nation builder, country builder. What they are describing is that he has helped to build China more. So that's sort of humorous, I guess. But anyway, so there was a reference by President Xi in a speech to the Thucydides Trap, which got some attention and some discussion in the usual places online, quickly giving way to the ongoing strife. It's not a legal war, so I don't call it a war, but history will label it whatever it is, with Iran along the path to where we are now. So the whole China trip was in the news during and briefly after, but then, not. But I said, hey, what is this? What is this? What are we talking about here? So got the book. If you didn't catch the contemporaneous coverage, which the statement did spark briefly, that is, the statement about the Thucydides Trap sparked some coverage for a moment. Thucydides was an Athenian historian and general. So the fact that he was a general, he was a general that was taking good notes. So he had a technical insight and provided a lot of detail. He wrote about the history of the Peloponnesian War, in particular the conflict like as it unfolded and so on between Sparta and Athens. So what was going on at a very analytical level, not at the like, oh yeah, they started fighting. Like 300 would have been a much longer movie if you included all the detail and so on. Not that 300 was with Persia about to attack Athens, and Sparta would step in, and so on and so on. The battle at Thermopylae, if I'm remembering correctly. So Thucydides, Athenian general and historian, Peloponnesian War, conflict between Sparta and Athens. His accounting and methods and analysis in particular are still studied today and appearing in speeches by foreign leaders or domestic leaders if you're in China. Let me get some water. Alrighty. So yeah, if you didn't catch all that, that's the general idea. The context of President Xi's statement was almost certainly, if not actually certainly, to the Allison book in the links, which is what I read. And so that's Destined for War. It's about China and the U.S. Where am I? Okay. And the book itself is on the dry side, essentially describing the trap itself, which is where a smaller or lesser power pursues the overtake of a larger power, presumably more powerful. They're not talking about, although not, I mean, depending on the nature of things, the geographical size of a country and the terrain and so on can actually be a factor. But generally speaking, this is about if you're going to be on the Olympic podium, the gold and the silver is going after the gold, right? So you got to have a little bit of animosity there that starts with, we want to be in the position you are. So this can often lead to war. The author goes through all of the scenarios which fit the definition of the trap, the circumstance, and the move from below, you could say, by the lesser power to overtake. And what transpired in each scenario, including, of course, whether a war took place or if it was avoided. It is possible to avoid war. The focus of the book, as we can guess from the title, is whether China will overtake the U.S. and how. Really, well, I guess more how. I think the contention is that China is pretty much on their way, although there are some complication there. A lot of hand-waving takes place. If you're Ray Dalio, you think China's already number one. And if you are, what's his name? Peter Zan. I've read 3 of his books. Very interesting. He's much more, his analytical view is that China is in very bad shape from a population perspective and a few other things. So he doesn't have quite the ecstatic optimism that a Ray Dalio has, for example. So who knows? But will they overtake? But how is the big question, based on the analysis of these other scenarios. So it's interesting, but very dry, a book. And then there's the turnings, the 4th turning, in fact. I learned of this concept in the original book, which I have not yet read. It's on the list from 2 places. One was Julian Dory. He's a YouTuber who frequently engages in conversations about conspiracies and other curious matters. And he was talking about how there is this cycle that goes on. In the book, there is, and I'm going to guess that in the other 2 books that I referred to, the original 4th Turning and then the Generations book by both authors, published in 2021, I'm going to guess that the length of a turning is a topic of conversation. So they definitely covered it in the 4th Turnings now. In the U.S., it's about 20. It's basically aligns with how we assign stages of life, at least the first 2, right? So in the first stage of life in the West, in the United States in particular, is you're born and then you reach 21. And at that point, you kind of enter adulthood. And so then after that, you figure, okay, so 21 years is each generation. So once you're at the end of your youth, whatever they call it, I can't remember. There are so many terms in this book. There are charts and stuff. I'm going to say this again because I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, there's a lot of charts and which comes before which and which leads to what and how this affects that. It's a lot of like take notes, I guess, if you feel like it, or find people have created charts online. So he was going into like, so a saeculum, I think that's how it's pronounced. A saeculum is 4 turnings, which are usually the length of a generation. And in the US lately, it's been 20, 21, 23 years, I think it is. And there's a contention now that they are actually getting longer. They have gotten shorter, but then they might approach 25 years. That require some analysis later, so you can't just declare it for the future. So there's a whole bunch of stuff just around that. But a 4-turning saeculum would then be about 84 years. So if you look at Civil War, if you look at Depression, the Great Depression, you look at World War II, then you look at the current state of affairs, like these things are all spaced out and, like, oh, okay, these are starting to line up on a periodic table of, So yeah, so they were talking about that and I said, oh, that does sound interesting. So I grabbed this book. And then I had heard Anthony Scaramucci, the Booch, mention it a couple of times around the same time. So I don't know if maybe he was watching Julian Dory for some conspiracy notes. He referred to the book and the concept multiple times here and there. The Mooch is interesting. I find him well-intentioned at the very least and fairly knowledgeable and well-read, I think. So I will suppose, since Apple TV made an attempt at producing a video series, which I did not watch, I don't know if it's a mini-series, if there's going to be more. So I don't know if it was a couple of episodes and it's done, or if there's going to be a season 2. Apple TV, who knows what's going on over there. About Isaac Asimov's Foundation book series, which has a thread of psychohistory through it. Psychohistory, if you're not familiar, is a model that you can use to predict the future based on human behavior. So it's psychology history into the future. It's actually an interesting thing, and in a moment, I will revisit that towards the end. I have read, I think I finished the first 3, the original first 3, and I believe there are 3 more afterwards, and then 2 in a prequel series, I think. I can't remember. It's not really my cup of tea, so I wasn't like, I got to read them all. So I don't know, but it was an interesting premise, how the ability to plan so far in the future by using this model. I don't know if you heard that, Production by Street, using this model to predict how humans behave and then the outcomes of those interactions over time and so on. So that seemed to sort of, it seems like they meet up somewhere between that and this turning notion, the generational theory. The basic idea is the generational cycles humanity has. Wait, the cycles have. Oh, okay, I've totally, the grammar is actually correct. The basic idea is the generational cycles of humanity. There we go. Of humanity have a periodicity to them where full 4-cycle interval, where each is called a saeculum. I forgot the word each. Okay, each 4-cycle interval is a saeculum. That has a Roman origin, so it's not a made-up word. The Roman saeculum was the age of a society. So I think they put it at about 110 years. So similar idea. Saeculum, S-E-C-U-L-U-M, saeculum. And each of the interstitial, is that misspelled correct? Oh, okay, misspelled that. Each of the interstitial periods is a turning. So the turnings don't have to be the same. They're not always a universal constant duration. So they're depending on phases of life and how long those last. And those are usually empirically determined. So they just call them turnings. I don't know why they don't call them generations, but there is probably a reason, because if you decouple them, it frees you from the implications of one on the other, I suppose. These are likened to seasons of a typical year, with final turning in a saeculum labeled winter. Also aligned with a crisis period. So the winter is typically a crisis, with next saeculum beginning on the generational boundary. So once the crisis is solved, a new saeculum begins with spring. A spring turning, which is basically kind of a reboot, almost literally springtime, right? A lot of the sequel book, which I chose to read first, because I figured, hey, if it's now, I should read that first. It's like reading What to Do When You Have a Flat Tire. You're like, oh, no, I got to start with the first book on what to do when your oil is dirty. Like, no, we have a flat tire right now. It's going into detail concerning the generations as we know them today. So you got boomers, the Generation X, millennials, and Gen Z. But it also goes earlier with the Lost Generation, GI Generation, GI. And then it goes farther back, although I don't know if they really had names for, Revolutionary War time, Civil War time, other periods. So yeah, obviously I've just picked the wars for those. But anyway, so each of the generations has some year ranges, an interval of time, and then he goes and correlates with various events and how they fit together. So yeah, basically applying them as they turn through correlated historical events, from wars to political leader selections. The political makeup and how the political parties fit together varies sort of along these patterns as well. Policy decisions, similar, and so on. I will read the original Turning book, which I linked after this one, and the authors published a book called Generations prior to this last one coming out. So William Strauss was still alive, and in the introduction, or I don't think it was chapter 1, in the introduction or whatever, the first part of the Fourth Turning Is Now book, the remaining author, Neil Howe, goes into some detail about how his co-author had passed away and untimely, and they wanted to bring this book up to date and align with certain things. So the Fourth Turning Is Now does have pandemic. It does have Trump, it does have Biden, but it doesn't have Trump 47. So almost certainly would have confirmed the notion that we are in crisis, the winter of the saeculum. So I'll get Generations also. It appears to be a fairly substantial book, although maybe only a little bit bigger than this Fourth Turning Is Now. So why did these interest me? Why am I talking about them right now? So you've all heard of the oft-repeated George Santayana quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." You've probably heard a variation of it. "Those who can't remember history are cursed to whatever." There's a few different variations, but George Santayana is an author, and this appears in one of his books. So yeah, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It's actually part of a larger passage that it probably makes sense to pull this out on its own. Otherwise, it doesn't quite take the same meaning, but it's good as a standalone quote, I suppose. Maybe you've heard that history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Hence, the title of today's episode does not say history on repeat, as it initially did, but I thought that would be a conflict. That was actually a Mark Twain quote. Samuel Clemens, if you prefer, but Mark Twain, and not George Lucas, who also famously said or described his prequel trilogy in that way. How come it has the same? Oh, because it rhymes. Lately, I'm leaning towards Churchill with "The longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward." That's pretty to the point. And on the internet, you will be able to find variations where the word "longer" is replaced by another "farther." So you might see it as "the farther you can look back, the farther you can look forward." But I did a little bit of research and found that it is indeed the original "the longer you can look back, the farther you can look forward." So for what that is. Understanding what happens can help to understand what might happen, and that includes the why, as in, why is this happening? What was the circumstance at the time, and so on. And this is why a deeper dive is probably useful if you're going to do any sort of historical compare and contrast, and especially if you're seeking to understand potential futures. The interesting thing with these two books specifically, check how to move some windows around there, sorry. The interesting thing with the two books specifically is that they both present a substantial amount of evidence of trends, repeatable scenarios, potential influences that can be observed ahead of time, and so on. That ahead of time, as in, if you look back in history, you could go farther back to see what led up to a particular event, and you can see what the circumstances were and what the interplay was, and so on. Then you can look at the current state of affairs. And again, history doesn't repeat itself, so you can't really easily say, this is exactly like Germany of whatever, or the US of 29, or all these circumstances. Yeah, but also it's not the same time. And then you can also look at alignment of the of the turnings in the saeculum, and in that case, maybe that is a thing. Anyway, Allison's book is obviously positioning a potential China-U.S. I'm sorry, positing. I chose that word specifically because I like that word. Not positioning, positing a potential China-U.S. conflict of some sort, which will likely take place, whether it is a hot war with actual missiles and bullets and all of that, or much more around economics and geopolitical influence and whatnot, which has tended historically to be what China prefers, not always what it's, that you can't always get what you want. But China tends to be thoughtful and long-term strategy oriented. So having a war, actually, the funny thing about war, especially if it's a continental war, like fought on the ground, is you blow things up of value. And if you've ever heard Sarah Payne, she's a retired instructor at the Naval War College, professor. She has a nice rundown on the difference between a continental power and a maritime power and all the policies, strategy that go around that. It's like, yeah, if you have a war on land, you're going to end up blowing things up that you want to keep if you're going to take the land. So they're very expensive. And China has some other geographical issues and so on. So continuing with their Belt and Road Initiative, for example, which is not that great, but the Belt and Road, or their position in the global trade model, their attempt to replace the U.S. in certain relationships, the BRICS currency, which the C in BRICS is for China. And why would they not say RMB? Why isn't the yuan going to be, just make it the yuan, the global yuan? Because they have reasons to not do that too. It will likely take place though in the next, not 2 years, but could be near, or it could be over the next decade. Or maybe we're already in a war with China, arguably. But the book builds the case with historical similarity that this could be, and it likely will happen in some way in the foreseeable future. Will President Xi Jinping still be in power? Maybe. He is permanently sitting in the chair. Will our current president still be in power? Almost certainly not. So we'll see what happens. Neil Howe, the author of the book, and his late co-author in the previous work and the formation of their generational theory, goes a bit further to suggest this explicit, though still imprecise, cycle aligned with phases of life and society and circumstances that came before and, it actually gets very complicated. I wrote a little complicated, but it actually gets very complicated. There are tables and illustrations around online that you can find. I'm not sure if the book would have come with. I'll have to see what they have for online resources that they've created. I got to look through the generational theory thing, but the book, he's just throwing out like different character archetypes and different generations and phases and what's happening and why and what leads to that, and what, as you're transitioning from one phase of life to another, as you're, approaching adulthood, as you're approaching retirement, all kinds of stuff going on. It's literally a book that one must reread. It has to be. Tables and illustrations, the phrases and the personae, circumstance, and who knows what I've already forgotten about. I'm not even going to try. There's too much. If there's a book that I would reread just after finishing it, it might be The Fourth Turning Is Here, except that I will likely read the original Fourth Turning book first, which might end up being about the same thing as far as references and terminology and so on. And see what I can retain from that one. And then the Fourth Turning Is Here sequel spends a lot of pages justifying, validating, and then redescribing the various elements of the theory. So it just sort of steps through different events and says, so this is an example of a lot of terminology and relationships between phases of life and the saeculum and so on. Not to mention the origin story of saeculum and why the turnings are selected the way they have been and all this stuff. So it's a reasonable defense of the notion, but it's a little bit dense. Mostly based on the West, so the U.S. and this part of the world, and then how they align with events in that history, and then through time. I mean, it's not just, it goes back quite a ways, but also comparing some things around the world and how those align, The one view is that the turnings would be of different duration because different sort of cultures and regions have slightly different, not like 10 years apart, but a couple years, and that can make a difference between different phases of life transitions and how they're viewed and so on. This all leads to the book published in 2023, suggesting that we are in the crisis winter phase right now. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say this part is pretty close. I think if he had published the book right now, he would have been a little bit more confident in that assessment. So why is this really interesting? Why am I doing this episode about this? So in my EU project, I made some fairly surface level comparisons with the founding of the United States and suggested the circumstances and motivations were very different to form a united Europe, in 93 versus, a long time ago, 1776. By the way, I'm kind of on the fence. I kind of think there's a difference between declaring independence and then forming a country. So yes, 250 years ago, Declaration of Independence, but there was no constitution and thus no official, legitimate, structured, and ready to continue forward, ready to march forward, United States of America until 1787. So could go either way on that. There, somewhere in the book, they talk about how it used to be they used to refer to the United States as literally a collection of states that were united. So the way they would describe it was much more of a collection of states, but it was after, I cannot remember when it was. It was not in the 1700s or 1800s. I think it was a little bit more recently. Maybe it was after the Civil War that it became the actual country, one United States. So it's sort of interesting. As I look over these two books so far, obviously there's a lot of analysis, comparison, and contrasting, compare and contrast, that is, that would be done or could be done, which I did not do, which should be done, of course, for a serious analysis prediction. I was indeed predicting that the EU would have a challenging time ahead of it. Although recall the year I took this class was the year the EU became official in 1993, November 1st, I believe, 1993. And maybe I was right, or maybe they were in a better turning, the autumn turning, perhaps. I don't know. Read the book. And more recently, we have entered the fourth turning, allegedly, if the book's premise is to be believed. And again, in the interim, 93 was essentially when the world, certainly the United States, said, so what's going on with this internet thing? And a lot of things, a lot of money started happening. So it's hard to say if maybe that was put off a little bit because of some financial successes. As I said earlier, the Cold War had come to an end. There was no real military adversary. And again, I'm glossing over things. So at scale, it was a pretty good time, I suppose. I had visited Europe when I was working for Philips in 1999, 98. I think it was 98. Went to Maastricht. I can never say it correctly, as I was reminded several times by the Dutch. That was the capital of the EU at the time. It's kind of interesting. And so yeah, they started this in a pretty reasonable time. The question is whether it would be better to start something during a crisis so that you emerge into the next saeculum, using these words, having formed a country and now ready to start something new, versus whatever part of the saeculum we were in 1993. And then there was a great financial success. There was general, now I'm not saying this because, the Iraq War was, Desert Shield and then Desert Storm had been in that time frame. So what was it? Desert Shield was 92 or 91? It was January of 92. Is that right? I guess I could look, but you can look too. So anyway, we were getting into it, and then we were inviting NATO and European troops, and despite allegations more recently, there were countries that did contribute quite a bit and soldiers who contributed everything, which is always unfortunate. But so it was an interesting time to form a country, but they were not at odds themselves. They were not under direct attack and so on. So yeah, maybe I was right. I don't know. The EU has been tested a little bit more recently. Brexit happened. So, we'll see. We'll see how things go. What did I know in 1993? Very little, turns out. Allison's book, so the book about the Thucydides Trap. If you're going to say Thucydian, you'd have to say Thucydidean Trap. Allison's book is very interesting given the times in which we live now. He published this book several years ago. The circumstances as they've evolved in the absolutely different ways each of China and the U.S. view almost everything. It is this difference that may lead to a Cold War along various axes like trade and the action in third countries, South America, all the Belt and Road and all that stuff that China has been pursuing, and regions rather than actually engaging in a hot war, which again is not. So China's trying to become a maritime power. The United States used to be a maritime power. Whether it still is, I suppose, will be up for debate soon, maybe tested soon. But it's unlikely that a war between the United States and China would take place through invasion. But what do I know? Those are just outlandish challenges. But who knows? It'll be interesting to see. But Chinese culture tends to favor not conflict options, possibly based on the reading or the writings and then the readings of Sun Tzu. The U.S. has a mindset that I think it's fair to say is rather the opposite of China in the context I just described. The circumstances compared and contrasted through history make for a compelling argument. Not only the non-China-U.S. relations, but the fact that China and the U.S. do have a fairly entangled relationship, and so something less destructive materially and in human toll destructive as a hot war, but more of a when you think about it, if China destroys the U.S. market, then fewer people are buying their products. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that makes this very complicated, but it depends on what happens. So we have cause for concern over the next few years, definitely. Maybe beyond that, maybe I won't be around when this all unfolds for real. Maybe you won't either. Who knows? I mentioned Foundation series, and I really saw the parallel between that and the saeculum and turning model, the generational model, Strauss-Howe, where large populations in different phases of life, that is, populations with people in different phases of life within the population, sort of chain together and guide broad behaviors and reactions to some events and changes that are arguably the result of the changes in the population and how each of the life phases responds and behaves. So in other words, it's a big feedback loop with multiple little looplets going on. It is kind of interesting to think about. It would be interesting if the generational theory could have a simulation model to project into the future based on events, circumstances, and the general tenor of the particular parts of the population in each of the life phases and how they are responding as they transition, they age from one to the other, and so on. It was an interesting book. I'll just say that again. Psychohistory is more of a mathematical model, spelling out probabilities chained together over time, enabling predictions in a distant future based on populations. And it's important, and this is pointed out a couple of times, which do not know that they are being modeled. Otherwise, you're liable to skew the model. So you have to apply the model to a population that doesn't know that they are being observed in this way, and how they behave along this model path. So I do see some parallels with that. I don't know if one was inspired by the other. Who knows? They're presented very differently, and but there's some overlap of notions. If you are able to plot on a psychohistory model what people will be doing in 100 or 82 years, and if you believe that the saeculum is about 82 years long, and that at the 82-year line, give or take, you'll be coming from a crisis into a sort of a new awakening, the spring and the new saeculum, then you can probably see, so our predictions are based on this, and then that over there could be the same. So I just found that interesting. Foundation, though, I don't know about that series. So, final section. I find the Strauss-Howe theory interesting enough to grab the previous book, so the original Fourth Turning, and whatever the full title was. And then the Generations book, which came out in 2021. I literally discovered it when I was reading about like what links to put on here and the references, because I don't know if you've read the book. So a little bit of background. This cycle theory sort of reminds me of some of the engineering projects I've worked on, where we observe behaviors and try to establish a behavior model so we know. So we've designed something, we make it, we build it, whatever it is, and then you see how it actually behaves, and you're like, okay, that's pretty close to what we hoped it would do. And then you might encounter some problem because there's some circumstance that was not accounted for, or maybe there's some race condition or something, some hidden, obscured thing happening. A variable is off, or something didn't get increment, whatever it is. And so when you discover this problem, you try to match what we are observing when you see the problem versus what you have observed before that might be very similar, but where there was no problem. So then you can actually start driving into, okay, well, what's the difference? Why did this happen? Can we set up an experiment so we can make it happen on demand, so we can debug it and observe it and so on? Does this apply to the cycles of history? I don't know. Maybe that's oversimplifying, but that sort of comes to mind. The Allison book about China and the U.S. was interesting because it was topical. It still is, and it will be for a while. It was interesting that President Xi Jinping did make that statement. That's a sort of a message to people who are paying attention, and probably with the assumption that a lot of the cabinet is not. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know if that sort of gamesmanship was going on. But it was not overly interesting, mostly because it was pretty dry, the book, that is. Not the potential war needs to be polished to make it shiny, and it is in the fourth turning, so who knows? But, I mean, we are not. Different book. But it was repetitive once the theory seemed to hold out about the dynamics between two powers opposed as they were describing. So it sort of turned into, yeah, okay, same thing. This could also be the case with the fourth turning is now, as they stepped, or as the one author steps through the examples and how they correlate and how the phases are changing, the turnings are changing as people age through, and all. Except that there are so many terms and so many sort of subtleties that map one to the other, and then so what would have happened if this was the next generation later, or why did this generation view this and that? So it turned it into a little bit more complicated an observation. So that might be interesting to you. Not sure. I gotta be honest. It doesn't matter to me if you read the book or not. But I would recommend that book. I'm wondering whether the events that unfolded in the various Thucydides-ish scenarios would align in interesting ways with the Strauss house cycles. So in other words, if you take the various wars or wars that took place or wars that were avoided amongst the various trap scenarios, how did they align on a Strauss house calendar timeline? So does that matter what the population is like at any given time and the circumstances, and then how they tend to react to them? The people in power, the youth who are going to be coming up to become the people in power. Okay, when I was in Silicon Valley, and then there was the bomb, the .com bomb in, was it 2001? 2001? There were people who lost a lot of money. And the comment was, it might have been then, or it might have been 2008, or probably both. The people that were giving financial advice, brokers, financial analysts, and so on, especially people that were working directly with money as an investment advisor in some role like that, they were, if they were younger, they had no memory of the Great Depression, of recessions, right? And there was only a recession in 1993. We were coming out of that recession, the Bush recession, into the Clinton presidency. So it's not like it was ancient history, but if people did not feel the risk personally from memories of it, of being affected by it, then you didn't have that caution, that risk aversion built in. So it's that sort of thing that becomes pervasive across a society and its generational makeup in a particular circumstance. So it is kind of interesting in general. So it would be interesting to see how it applies to the scenarios presented in the Allison book. I am looking forward to the Generations book, which for all I know will be exactly like the book I'm just finishing, and maybe then exactly like the first book, the first fourth turning book. But the idea is interesting, and I would explain a few things without trying to be a theory of everything as far as I can tell. it just makes some pretty compelling arguments for the cyclic behavior. And if you think about how things skip generations, and the rebellious young people and the parents that they were rebellious at one point, but were their parents more conservative, or were they going through a war, or was there depression? What was the circumstance when they were young and their parents were becoming parents? And so all this multiple moving parts. It seems just on the verge of complex, but still not quite. So it is kind of interesting. Whatever the case, I continue to find as I read and consume more history analysis and information in general, that is probably the worst taught topic in public schools. I don't know that private schools do any better, but well, this is a topic for another time, I suppose, but maybe another show even. I think what Churchill said, it probably makes sense, and that you should think about it, as more people should, the value of a longer look back and how it affects how we can look farther forward, and with some insight, not the ability to predict the future, but at least to pretend to understand what might come to pass. And so, yeah, I think history is in dire need of people talk about math being a problem. There is no history calculator. Think about that. All right, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for listening, as always. I enjoyed talking to you for about an hour, and I hope you enjoyed listening to me for about that long. Hopefully that long. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. I forgot to mention this. You don't have to spend any money, but that is where the links to all of my various programs are and all this. So it might be helpful if you would like to find some of my other programs. You can hear my voice is about to go on break, so I think I'll do the same. Thank you, and we'll catch you for the next episode, or maybe before. Bye-bye.